This is my latest woodworking project, which is a Greene Greene inspired media cabinet. Now, the Greene brothers were American architects in the early 20th century who did very high-end residential homes, and not only built the home but also in many cases did the furniture inside. And they had some very unique features that they used in the furniture, and I've incorporated a number of those into this piece, and I'll explain them as we go through it. Rich warm colours always used, and very soft rounded edges, so you'll see those two elements as we work through the piece. Now if we start at the top, the whole thing is made out of African mahogany, a very large slab sitting across the top there, and if wood expands or contracts it tends to do so across its width, and you'll see that the grain on the top runs from left to right, and capping it at both ends is something called a breadboard end, and you'll notice that the grain runs north to south, if you were. So by putting it at a 90-degree angle, it contains any, or restricts any, movement that you might see in that large piece of wood at the top. Now the Greene brothers certainly were not the ones to invent breadboard ends. They'd been used in a number of cases, but what they did was give it some prominence, and so you can see that the breadboard end is actually raised up above the surface of the core, and it also extends beyond the core by about 1/8 of an inch. And so that's fairly similarly, as we go through it, a recurring theme of the Greenes is things that they gave prominence to things that tended to be somewhat hidden or not given a lot of prominence in the past. Now, having put the breadboard on the end, you have the question of how do you attach it to the core. They could have used some hidden screws or joinery underneath it, but essentially what they did was screw right through the end of the breadboard end and straight into the core, which gave it maximum strength. But the problem that then gave is that you had a screw hole at the end, and what do you do with it? And so the solution is probably the most recognizable Greene Greene feature, which are these ebony plugs, ebony, a black African wood that they've used to cover the screw head. And so you'll see that in a number of places in the piece as we go through it, essentially hiding the joinery that goes in there. Now that plug could have just been sanded flush and sit flat with the piece, but in keeping with that idea of prominence, you'll see it actually extends beyond the piece, and it also has a softened pillowed face to it. So you'll see that in some of the larger plugs. You'll also see some smaller ones where the design required a smaller. In some cases you'll also see some rectangular ones, and on the end of the breadboard here you'll see that the plug actually follows the shape of the extension on the breadboard end. So second element to talk about is probably in the drawers themselves. I think most people are familiar with dovetail joinery, which is very beautiful, but it's hidden and you only see it when the drawer is open. Now you'll see these very loud and proud fingers that the Greenes have incorporated into their drawers, so which is an extension of the side piece. Again, it sits out about 1/8 of an inch beyond the face to give it prominence, and certainly I think adds some very interesting detail and character to the piece itself. And then the drawer pulls probably the one element I was most proud of in terms of building, because it was so difficult. Rather than being absolutely square, I don't know if you can see, but there's actually an arch in the pull. So in the middle, where you're most likely to grab it, it's at its widest, and then it tapers off to the ends, which takes some of the weight and heft out of the pull and softens it, and I think gives it a very nice look to the overall piece. And again, finished with the different ebony plugs. So they're the main elements. It was quite a journey getting to this point. What really started as a beautiful piece of mahogany timber like that ended up like this. When I started, I really didn't know what the piece would look like or even how I was going to get to it, to the final piece in some cases, but I'm pretty proud of the outcome, and I hope it might inspire you to do something or build something that you think might be beyond your basic talents.